Women have been angels of mercy to me and have tenderly led me from the verge of ruin, while men stood aloof and mocked. That's Edgar Allan Poe. Today my purpose is to persuade you to begin to view the legendary and often misunderstood Edgar Allan Poe in a new light, a more sympathetic light. Poe is not only one of the most significant writers in U.S. history, but in the history of the written word. Continuing to mislabel him and misread him solely as an alcohol-fueled, deranged womanizer is simply wrong. Of course, those who continue to see Poe negatively point to his mistakes, like his tendency to turn to alcohol when stressed. I hope that over the next several minutes you will listen with reason and find some sympathy in your hearts. For over 20 years, both in college and in my high school classroom, I have studied and taught the works of Poe. I have read and written about his short stories and his poems. I have studied in depth his biography and how his tragic life spills out on every page of his mysterious writings. First, I will shed light on the early losses of Poe. Next, I will look at his lost loves. And finally, I will shed light on his desperate final years. To truly see the harsh realities that Poe endured, we need to start at the beginning, the loss of his mother and father. Poe loved his actress mother, and she adored him. But like with so many female figures after her, Poe would lose his mother Eliza to tuberculosis. Before Poe was born, his father abandoned the family. Not long after tuberculosis struck Eliza at a young age, she was alone except for her children, and she needed help. Quote, Eliza Poe, assistance was needed, for she was without support or money. Her father had died when she was 2, her mother, an actress, 9 years after. Her first husband, an actor, was dead. Her second husband, the actor David Poe, had left her. He also left fatherless the children who waited near her. From this excerpt from Kenneth Silverman's book, we see that Poe was affected early on by the loss of his mother and father. Sadly, the loss of Poe's mother would not be the last time Edgar would weep over a lost love. Eliza's death would have been enough to devastate Poe, but still a young man, Poe would find a family. But again, he would be shunned. After the death of his mother, Poe was adopted by the Allen family who lived in Richmond, Virginia. Poe's adopted mother, Frances, pampered Poe. His wealthy stepfather put Poe into the best schools that money could afford. Like Eliza before, though, Frances was unfortunately struck by the dreaded scourge of tuberculosis. As she was lying ill, coughing up blood, her husband John, in the adjacent room, was having affairs, and Edgar knew about this. When confronted by his stepson, John became enraged and sent Edgar to the newly opened University of Virginia to study. Although this sounds like a step up for Poe, the hatred that was shown by John was actually evident in the lack of money and support he gave to Poe. From Poe's museum, quote, by the end of his first term, Poe was so desperately poor that he burned his furniture to keep him warm. Humiliated by his poverty and furious with Allen, Poe was forced to drop out of school and return to Richmond. However, matters continued to worsen. He visited the house of his fiancée, Elmira Royster, only to discover that she had been engaged to another man. Not only was Poe once again left alone, his first romance came crashing down around him as well. 2 mothers lost in death, abandoned by 2 fathers, Poe struggled through poverty, success, and failure. In the final years of his life is where many began to form the lasting and negative image of Poe. In the waning years of Poe's life, he struggled with his loneliness. He struggled with alcohol, and he admittedly struggled with his own sanity. At the age of 27, Poe had garnered fame and notoriety, but he was broke and lonely. He needed a family, and he found one in his Aunt Maria and her daughter, Virginia. When Poe brought them to live with him, He soon after married Virginia. He was 27 and she was 13. This is one of the most infamous moments that those who continue to look down upon Poe love to cite. For me, it's less about a typical sexual romance and more of a desperate man seeking companionship and to fill a void left by numerous lost loves and countless disappointments. After years of actually being happily married, albeit to his cousin, tragedy would strike Poe's life again. One evening, as Virginia sang in their home, a drop of blood appeared on her lips, and Poe knew exactly what that meant: tuberculosis and certain death. She fought along with Edgar. She got better, got worse, got better, got worse. And no matter how hard he tried, Poe could not keep Virginia from dying. Perhaps Poe's most famous work, The Raven, depicts a desperate speaker asking time and again of the winged messenger if he will ever see his beloved Lenore again. Quoth the Raven, nevermore. As Poe penned these lines, in the next room, his own wife, his last lifeline, was dying. Quill's literacy notes, quote, Poe used the first person by virtue of situations in The Raven, taking direct influence from Poe's life experiences. Among many other misfortunes, including living a life of poverty and being orphaned at a young age, Poe's beloved wife, Virginia, died after a long illness. Unfortunately, once again, Poe's own life supplied material for his writing. It is all too personal, too hurtful, too real. Poe's words are, on paper, cathartic. Although what we do know is whatever relief he found in his writing was never enough to quell the demons that haunted him from his early years. We have explored only a few of the tragedies that befell Edgar Allan Poe in his short life. The museum named in his honor published, quote, he is often seen as a morbid and mysterious figure, lurking in the shadows of moonlit cemeteries and crumbling castles. This is the Poe of legend. But much of what we know about Poe is wrong. The product of a biography written by one of his enemies to defame the author's name. Today I wanted to put one of the country's most valuable and prominent writers in a new light, in a fair and empathetic light. I challenge readers to explore his famed The Cask of Amontillado. For me, it's Poe's imagining of how he can seek revenge on his stepfather who shunned him. And looking at the use and abuse that alcohol plays as a central role, it is telling of how introspective Poe truly was. I ask readers and non-readers alike to search, to dig deep, and find out what exists below the surface of what is assumed about Edgar Allan Poe. It is not only true about a literary legend, but perhaps an important reminder about how we should take time to ask questions and not just accept what time and opinion has landed at our feet as truth. Poe is too important, too richly layered as a writer to continue to be mislabeled and judged. This is a man who, from before he could take his first breath, was abandoned. A man who lost time and again those he loved, namely women. Men to Poe were evil. Men were those who left, who shunned him, who lied, who didn't love him. Imagine living through just some of what I've depicted today. And ask yourself, how would I cope? What would I journal about? Who would I turn to? Ask these questions thoughtfully before we continue to write or miswrite Poe's place in history.